in an election for the leader of the Labour Party in Britain was an political earthquake. And why would we talk about an election as an earthquake? Well, I'm going to try and go over a few points today so that you know what we're talking about. You know, we're a Marxist-Leninist organization. We don't believe that elections can make a change in the social structure of society, and but they can, as Marx and Engels said, show the level of political understanding of the working class, the maturity of the working class. And this was a particularly dramatic change that took place in Britain, that is sort of a reflection of how the anger of the masses of workers in Europe, and I would imagine also in the United States, is taking a form in the electoral arena right now. So what I want to go over tonight, first I want to explain who is this guy, Jeremy Corbyn, who got elected leader of the Labour Party. What's this situation in Britain that may end within the Labour Party and within the political struggles in Britain that makes his election possible? What is the Labour Party? What were the events that led to the election? So, and what it means for us and what it does not mean. Okay. So let me, just to make a little bit quick thing, I want to show you a little bit who Jeremy Corbyn is. It happens, I met Jeremy Corbyn once. We were both speaking at a meeting in Madrid in November of 2001. And it was right after the invasion. It was a few months after the September 11th events here in the United States, here in New York and Washington. And it was right after the invasion of Afghanistan. And the organization in Spain, in Madrid, that invited people to speak, wanted to bring people in who opposed the intervention in Afghanistan. And my personal reaction to him was that, well, as I said in the article, was that he was just like one of us, you know. He wasn't a big shot. He was somebody who was looking to make the meeting a success as best he was. So he made a good impression on me. And later on, he became the chair of the Stop the War Committee. That's probably why he was invited. He was active with the Stop the War Committee in Britain, which has been leading the anti-war movement since that time. I'll say more about them later. But just now a little bit about Corbyn. Corbyn was elected first in 1983. Even before that, to work with maybe the names you know of in the progressive movement, at least people who have been active for a long time would know. Tony Benn, who died a couple of years ago, and we've had speaking at some meetings over here. And George Galloway, who has taken a lot of the same kind of positions that Corbyn has. Galloway is more of a out front kind of guy. Charismatic speaker. Corbyn isn't. Well, maybe he is now, but he wasn't in those days. He was more laid back. Within the Labour Party, he was what they call a backbencher. He wasn't up front. And he represented a small area inside London, which I believe is a very working class area and probably multinational. And he's in Islington North. It's actually the smallest area that you can, has a representative in Britain. And he's been elected to there ever since 1983. Every few years he gets elected. So he was, before that, he was active in the defense of the Birmingham Six, who charged falsely with setting a bomb in Birmingham in 1974. So it was like, one of the defensive here, maybe the New York Panther defended, something like that. So he was active in that in the beginning as a lawyer with Tony Benn. And then he was active in the anti-apartheid movement in the 1980s. Solidarity with the South African and Namibian miners. He speaks at all the trade union congresses, and he defends workers' rights in Britain. That was a picture of him on a bicycle that I didn't manage to get up. But here's the way they joked about it, that he has a Mao bike. But He rides a bicycle around his area. He didn't even have a car up until his election to Labor leader. So he rides his bicycle back and forth, representing all the people, taking all their grievances and trying to solve them, and that's how he got elected. He's not like Bernie Sanders, actually, on the international questions, but he's like Bernie Sanders in that he represents his area and gets things for the people in the area. What's that?
He's like Vito Marcantonio.
Okay, but nobody would know who that is. Not nobody, but Vito Marcantonio was a communist who was elected as in the city council in New York and did a lot of that same kind of stuff. Okay. Now, a long time ago, in the 1940s, 1950s, when they had proportional representation in the voting in New York, so you could get elected for things like that, even if you were a communist. Now, soon after, you might have read that right after he was elected, he had to go to some ceremony honoring the World War II things, and he was the only one here not singing the national anthem. See, because it says, God save the Queen, and of course, he's a Republican, he's against the monarchy. They also insult the Scots in the national anthem, in one of the verses, probably not the one they sing. In fact, here's a caricature of him doing it. Show your Queen your tonsils, traitor. But when he met with the rank and file members of the armed forces, they had a different reaction to him. I put it here because it's important for what I'm going to say later. Corbyn speaks at union meetings, as I said. Now, right after he got elected to Labor leader, he went to that demonstration. 50,000 or 100,000 people came out demonstrating solidarity with the refugees and migrants in Europe. So he has the right priorities. He has the right priorities. He's not a Leninist, but he's probably the last living honest social democrat in Congress, in the Parliament, left social, and anti-imperialist. So he's the chair of the Stop the War Coalition. He's on demonstrations defending Gaza, defending Palestine. So this is a big difference with Bernie Sanders. I was trying to see what they would find to make scandal of him. He was married 3 times, so I wanted to see what the story was, if there was some kind of scandalous story about that. It turns out, though, his first wife divorced him because he spent all his time going down to the office and making copies of things and giving them out and stuff, and never took her out on dates. This is his wife now, who's a Mexican, and she imports coffee from Chiapas. So probably she's a Zapatista sympathizer. The Labor Party began as a social democratic party based on the labor unions in Britain, which were strong labor unions. But the Labor Party in general, even though it was inclusive and it had a lot of left-wingers in it, was always, when in power, and most of the time when it was in opposition, loyal to British imperialism. So it carried out all the wars. Probably the time when the British Labour Party brought the most social benefits to the British working class was in the period right after World War II, when they introduced, for example, the National Health Plan, and where a lot of the big industries and stuff were nationalized, and lately have been denationalized. And the Labour Party, in general, over the last, has kept moving to the right, not only being supporting all the imperialist adventures of Britain, but also turning more and more against the working class inside Britain. So that the new Labour Party that Tony Blair is associated with, you can all boo Tony Blair if you'd like, who you know was like a buddy to George Bush, well, first with Clinton waging the war against Yugoslavia, and then with George Bush in Iraq and Afghanistan, and sort of carrying on as a loyal junior partner of U.S. imperialism in the conquest of the world. And as the British ruling class is very rich and very much into banking, and is lined up with U.S. imperialism on almost everything. They might be a little pissed off that they're not the ones giving the orders, but they've made their peace with that situation. And the British Labour Party has, to the greatest extent, gone along with it. However, I mean, there were more left-wing tendencies in the Labour Party, although one called the Militant was pushed out right before the Blair came into office. I mean, I think earlier than that, and has continued its gravity to the right. So it's almost like the Democratic Party in the United States, you know, just a loyal member of imperialism, and it has been going along with all the austerity programs that have dominated the capitalist world, so that even more so than in the rest of Europe, the gap between rich and poor in Britain has been growing tremendously over the last 10, 15 years. This has led to a great deal of disillusion with the workers, and also among the workers and among the youth, and also in disgust with the Labour Party. The people in the Labour Party, of course, the worst from the point of view of being most right-wing of the Labour Party are the ones that are elected to Parliament, and the ones that are in the front bench, the ones who are have formed the government and have been the part of the imperialist government. And they sort of barely tolerated Corbyn when he was working in his little area and going out and making these speeches and stuff like that, and they make fun of him, but they figured he was not too significant. And this all, and they were taking over the party and also moving as much power as possible away from the labor unions, which, as well, almost all labor unions all over the world, have been growing weaker, partly because of there's not as many workers working in industry and stuff like that in the places where they were organized. So this finally led, I know Comrade Gregg has been writing now and then about the struggles that have taken place. The last article he wrote, I think, was about the struggle of the workers in the underground, the subways in London. There have been more and more, even mass demonstrations against austerity. And the Conservative Party is now in the government. They elected David Cameron is the Prime Minister, and the Conservative Party is in government, and they're making a frontal attack on the labor unions that's more or less like Scott Walker's attack on the labor unions in Wisconsin, except it's on the national scale. And more than national, it's also in Scotland, and in fact, that was the sort of the first sign of this revolt, as Comrade Gary brought out in the meeting we had here, when was that? 2 weeks ago, that the vote for the Scottish Nationalist Party, which won so strong, won 56 out of the 59 seats in Scotland, was a turn away from the Labour Party and a turn away from austerity. So it was not only a movement of Scottish nationalism, but it was an anti-austerity movement that was mobilized, and a rejection of the turn of the Labour Party to being just another pro-capitalist party. I mean, as I said, the Labour Party was always pro-imperialist, in that it always supported the empire, or what was left of the empire of Britain. But it was not, it did fight for the rights, some of the rights of the workers. And it stopped doing that. So the Labour Party had a big defeat, so its leader got resigned. Miliband, Ed Miliband was his name. He resigned after the election, I think it was in January, and they had to have an election for the Labour leader. And most of the people who were running in elections were similar to the old ones. They were more or less people who represented the same people in Parliament, the same rich, the same privileges that that Miliband and Tony Blair and Gordon Brown represented. So the left wanted to make some kind of showing, and after a couple of meetings, Corbyn said, "Okay, I'll run," you know, and then, okay. It's booking 15 minutes. You can't believe it when you're doing it, right? When he decided to do it, nobody thought he would win. In fact, he had to get like 35 people in Parliament to sign you on, and he only had about 20 of them voting for him. And he finally sort of embarrassed the others into signing on to allow him to run, because they sort of thought, oh, well, he's not going to win, and if we don't have somebody in from the left, nobody's going to pay any attention. So let's make believe we have an opposition, we have a left opposition, we'll sign on. And they voted. They regret that. They really are sorry for that now. And so he got on, and he made it, and all of a sudden, he started getting all the support. Now, the other maneuver that they were doing was to weaken the strength of the labor unions. So to do that, they made it possible for people to become Labour Party members to pay £3, and they would get the right to vote. And then they figured by doing that, that would dilute the strength of the labor leaders. But instead what happened is all these young people, all the workers who had got disgusted with the Labour Party and left, and all the politicals who got disgusted and left, they paid their £3, and instead of having 170,000 voters, they had 500,000 eligible voters. 420,000 voted, and 260,000 of them voted for Jeremy Corbyn. So not only did he win, he trashed them all. He got this enormous vote that trashed them all. Now, okay, so now he's the leader, he's named his cabinet includes people from the other tendencies in the labor movement, and he is under attack by 95% of the corporate media. I don't know what the other 5%, I mean the Independent and the Guardian write a few halfway sympathetic articles now and then. People like this guy Milner, Seamus Milner, and Tariq Ali is all for him, if you know Tariq Ali. And but the media is just on him. I mean, if he stumbles on his bicycle, there's an article about it. Corbyn stumbles, or he somehow someone accused him of not appointing women to the leadership, because he only had 16 out of the 30 people in his shadow cabinet were women. So but no one was one of the top people or something like that. So we got somebody to be the top. But anyhow, you can see what it is. Now, this brings us to the question of the state, and I have about 4 minutes to develop that, because Will Corbyn, whatever he has, he's trying to, I'm sure he's trying, and he has people working with him from the Stop the War Committee and from the grouping inside it who are, I've been working with him all along. I'll talk about them in the question and answer, I guess. But they're leftists, and they're organizing, they're trying to organize committees of, like popular assembly, we call it popular assembly, no, some kind of assembly. But it's that idea. Popular organizations that operate outside the structure of the Labour Party that can support him, because that's what he needs. He can't get anything done without something outside. The state, the bourgeois state, is in control of everything over there. They control the money, they control the army, they control the police, they control, in Britain they also have, if everything else fails, they have the monarchy, who can declare an emergency and take over. So the ruling class has all kinds of things that give them a way to control society, even if he should be elected prime minister, which is, the next election is not scheduled until 2020. And there's a lot of time for them to get rid of him in one way or another. The reason I showed the picture of him, it doesn't depend on how great or strong or honest he is, but he's not the kind of person that's just going to be bought out by money or something like that, see? So there's other kinds of pressures that they will put on him. He didn't spend all his life doing this just to, drive around in the car. He likes his bicycle. And so from that point of view, that's what we have to understand. None of the electoral things show how you can change society and make it a workers' state. A whole different kind of movement has to grow up, an independent movement, a mass movement, and one that is willing to take on a fierce struggle with the ruling class, and not one that can be won just by elections. And of course, he's not elected yet either. That's far from the case, and they're all figuring that he's so far left he can't get elected. On the other hand, they are worried because they thought that this summer too, and they know that there's a lot of anger and disillusionment amongst the working class, and they don't know what direction that's going to go in. So this is something that has the ruling class frightened over there. They don't know exactly what's going to come of it, and if this is going to, I would think that the election of Corbyn is like a jolt of, gives a jolt of optimism to those who want to bring about change in England, in Britain. And I mean, as I said about Sanders, it's obvious Sanders isn't an anti-imperialist like him. But even the big turnouts for Sanders in his mild pro-worker kind of statements and stuff like that are a sign of something going on. Something's going on in the population. From our point of view, this something is something good. They're fed up with the austerity. They're fed up with capitalism as it looks in front of them. And it's possible to move, reach out to these masses and to the people who are in motion. And if this turns out to be something that brings in motion and brings the working class in Britain, even in their weakened position, into a position of struggle, then it means that some changes can take place, or that at least the struggle can start to develop. Now we saw that throughout Europe, not only with the election of Syriza in Greece, even though it didn't turn out to be something that could be, that they could capitalize on, and the leadership has changed and given up on carrying on a frontal struggle, but also in Spain with the electoral manifestation of it is the wanting to elect this Podemos, which is sort of an electoral representation of the people in the street who were, what's their name again? Indignados, the indignant ones in the street, like the Occupy Wall Street here, which is a smaller version of it. And it shows that there is a change taking place within the working class and the youth that points them in the direction of struggle. And it's a question for Marxists, for Leninists, for those who want to bring about struggle, to figure out how do we get into a movement like this? How do we appeal so that we can move it in a direction where it's understood that revolution is needed, and that a mass struggle independent of all the bourgeois political parties is needed in order to begin the steps to that struggle? How do we do it to get into the working class and into the union movement, and make this a fighting movement, and one that does not, I don't have time to go into this now, but there's a part of Fred Goldstein's book, Low Wage Capitalism, where he takes up both the fact that imperialism exists, was used to give a certain amount of benefits to the working class, to certain elements in the working class, and turn their party in the direction of supporting imperialism while being still labor organizations. And that by diminishing the amount of wages and the share that the workers have now in this constant way, and making life more unstable for the working class, it raises the possibility of winning them over ideologically away from the the capitalist ideology and away from this type of thinking that they're part of this imperialist thing. And we hope that Corbyn can survive. He was, as I said, I didn't say it, but there was a general, an anonymous general spoke this week, and more or less threatened a coup should he be elected prime minister. And we hope that Corbyn can appeal to the rank and file in the army, the way you saw him in the picture over there, right? And that they can say no to the general should that situation come about. But anyway, it was like a graphic presentation right in front of you that the capitalist state exists, and that's what has to be smashed before you can make social change, that this general spoke up. It's good he spoke up so soon. The lesson, we can have a lot of time to teach that lesson. Thank you. A couple of things that were raised in the comments. Larry asked about the, didn't ask, but I think there's a question in there about these citizens' assemblies. And this is the only quote I have about it. Speaking at a Labor List event September 17th, Shadow Communities and Local Government Secretary John Trickett said he had been asked by Corbyn to organize a series of citizens' assemblies across the country to develop a new constitutional and political framework for Britain by reaching out beyond Parliament and the Labour Party. I think we just have to watch and see what that actually turns into. Well, you know, it's not really clear. It's just the first hint of what it's there. What Deirdre asked about Corbyn's support from what we would call the oppressed communities in Britain, I don't know what Islington North is. You know, if it seems like a working class district in London. I could not find really specific stuff about support from you know, the different groups, but I would imagine that it's not a all-white community. And I know that the committee against the war has a working relationship with the Muslim organizations and has for years had a working organization. Obviously, he has a record of support for this. I don't know about his interaction with West Indian organizations, and of course with the Irish, he was the first one in Parliament to invite Jerry Adams to speak in 1983, to come to 84, something like that. He was the first one to invite a representative of Sinn Féin, really, and then Jerry Adams was considered the head of the Irish Republican Army. And so he has a good record with some of the oppressed communities, and I would imagine he does, but we'll have, I haven't found too much really specific about it. And that's it, really. I mean, I think you just have to think. I tried to think of what would be an analogous situation over here, and none of them really work right. But I was thinking, what if Ramsey were younger, like, and somebody talked him into running for the primaries, and on Super Tuesday he won 6 of the 9 primaries. Now, wouldn't that be something? I mean, it would be like, we wouldn't think, oh, well, he's not a Marxist-Leninist or something like. We would think this shows some kind of shift in the population, and as far as we know, he's been straight all along. I mean, straight in the sense of being loyal to his politics and to his positions all along. And that's the same thing with Corbyn up to now. Now he's now been elevated to a position beyond which anything he ever dreamed of before. And who knows, the pressures that are on him now are enormous, and I would not want them on me, that's for sure. But let's wish him luck and hope that it leads to a stronger struggle in Britain.